Welcome back, everybody, to what I hope will be the last video in this Postman build series. I will say some more things at the end of the video, but for now, let's just go ahead and get started. I don't want this video to be too long, and we have quite a bit of things left to do. So let's just jump in head first. Let's go open embedded request. If you've been following along, I think this will make sense to you. First thing we're going to do is, so if you look here, the styles on params, headers, and body is all uniform. For you, this might not be the case. I think I did this at the end of the last video, or after I ended last video. So all you need to do is go to flex params and then select this table here, copy the table class. So Postman table. This is if you have the custom CSS added, and then go add it as a class here, and then as a class on this table. And then the other things, the two other style things you need to change, actually they're not style, the two other properties you need to change for table headers in this table one, which is the body, is you need to turn enable row selection. You need to turn that off, and you also need to turn highlight off. That way when you here, let me go here, and then when you enable, so row highlight here is true, it highlights the row. We want that off. That's just my personal choice. You can keep it on if you want. and then for the table one, you do the same thing. Turn row selection, enable row selection off. Let's see here. Yeah, you want to turn this off. And then the other thing you want to do is go to the rows property here, turn striped off and turn highlight off. Let's make sure striped is also turned off here. So turn striped off and highlight off. And then you should have this uniform look here across these three tables. If you add this custom class here we have, if you add Postman table and to headers and to body, and they still look like the default perspective table, sometimes what needs to happen is you need to close the view and then reopen it, and then it'll sync your styles. Also, if you just added the custom CSS, you might need to merge changes from the gateway a few times, close the view and reopen. That's just what I found working with custom styles. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, this may seem kind of disconnected from everything else, but it'll tie in the end, is we're going to wrap each of these tables in a container, and you'll see why here in a few minutes. So let's put it in a flex column. Let's put all of these in a flex column. And then this one as well, wrap in container, flex column. And I'm going to rename these. So let me actually rename this to, what did I use? Yeah, TBL body. I'll rename this to flex body. I'll rename this to flex header. Oops. And I'll rename this to flex params. I don't know why, but there's a bug, at least with the version of Ignition I'm running. When I change the name and hit enter, it doesn't change, but then when I close the view and reopen, you see that the names are all changed here. So I need to change the flex headers. That's weird. That might just be a bug with the version of Ignition I'm using, which I think is 8.1.13, but I may be wrong. 8.1.11, so I'll need to update. Anyway, so after you do that, this will become apparent here why we did that. Let me show you a problem that we're going to need to fix, but that you probably won't understand unless you see it in action. So I enabled preview mode here in the designer. When I go to headers and enable and disable this, you can see that when I when I play around with these, so like if I uncheck this, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to fix our tables here. Not really fix, we're going to add the custom message we have. So if you look here, we have on edit cell commit. So whenever we change a row value, we want it to actually commit, because for now on this table, for example, on headers, we can change, just remove the content type, and then when we hit enter, nothing actually happens. It's because we need to add an event on edit cell commit. So we can go here on edit cell commit, copy this, and then add it to this table here as a script. And then also this table here on edit cell commit should be already in here. And then we also have a few messages. So you can see that here. Let me close this and reopen. Oh, I know why. It's because I was in preview mode. So you can see here we have a few messages in the top table: change cell and delete row. And we're going to make a change because, oh, okay, I'll show you what the problem will be if we just add these, if we add these two messages. So let me go add one called delete row, script here, delete row. Okay, and then also to this table, if I add delete row, I think many of you can already see the problem. Here's the script I'm adding. When you go preview mode and you delete a row here, so we're going to delete params row 0, you can see that it deleted row 0 for each table here, which is not what we want. We want each table to be separate. So if we delete row 01, here it's going to give us index out of range because headers and params are empty tables. So we actually need to pass in another property. We're going to keep track of which table the message is coming from. So on change cell, okay, I don't think we need to track the table here on change cell, but on delete row we definitely do. So on delete row, we're also going to pass in table from the payload. Let me zoom this in, payload, and then we'll call it table. We didn't actually add this into the payload yet. And then we're going to check if table is equal to, let's call it params. Then we're going to delete the row. If not, so if we're deleting from headers, if we're deleting row 0 from headers, we don't want it to also delete from params and body. I hope that's pretty clear. Okay, so now let's add the same thing here. Delete row, table is equal to payload. We're not actually passing this yet, like I said. Payload table, and then we're going to check if table is equal to headers. We're going to indent this, and then the last one here will also do the same thing. Table equals payload table. We could have copied and saved ourselves some work. If table is equal to body, we'll call it body. There we go. Okay, so now let's open our delete let's open our delete view here. Oops, delete. So when you press this button here, the message has no way of telling which table to actually delete the value from. So what we're going to need to do is to pass in a view parameter, as you saw that I just deleted. I did this earlier. We're going to need to pass in a view parameter that keeps track of which table our delete button is, to keep track of in which table the delete button was pressed. So, and then on the button, we can actually go to configure events, and then when we send the message, we want to add. So when we send the message, we want to add here table. That's what we called it in the payload, remember? And then we want to bind that to our param input param table. So just like this. I'll make this nicer. That way it's easier to tell what's going on. There we go. Just like this. And you can pause here. And then now, so if we go back, let's save here and then go back here. Let me actually copy this data, copy. Let me add some more, paste, paste. Let me copy this and go here, paste, and also here just to show, paste. Now when we hit play here, you can see that I can hit this last button for the table params. Oops. Oh, okay. We're not actually passing in our table name yet. So what we need to do now is go to each table, and then in our delete column here, we're also going to need to pass in the table. So here it's going to just be a static value, and for here we're going to call it params. So we pass it in through the column, it gets passed to the button, and then when we click the delete icon here, we send a message back to this table, and then it'll delete the specific one. And we're going to differentiate between tables using this view param here on each table here on the fifth column. So we'll call it params, and then let's go here, do the same thing, pass in a view param, call it table, and here we'll call it headers. And then also here, last one, we'll pass in a view param called body, table body. There we go. Now when we hit preview, you can see that you can delete this, and then if you go to headers and body, you can see that they still have 3 rows each, while params has 2. I can delete 2 from headers, and you can see that all of them have different numbers of rows, even though they all started with 3. So we fixed that. The other thing, though, that we have a problem with is if you uncheck this, you can see that it also unchecks this one. And if you check it, there's a lot of inconsistent behavior here. That's because we also need to pass our table name. So you catch that here. I'll check it, uncheck it here, and you can see it's unchecked. We also need to pass our table name to the checked view here. So let's go to each table, just like we did for the delete column, we need to do for the checked field as well. So let's go to view params, and I also found out you don't need to pass in for the column name. There's a default param that's passed in by default. You don't need to pass it in, you just need to receive it, called column, that keeps track of the column name. So we'll fix this here shortly, but we can just reuse this parameter here and instead call it table, and then have a value of body for this lowest table. Here do the same thing. We can have a view param called table, and then we can call it headers, and here we do the same thing here, table params. Okay, now let's go to our checkbox view that we're embedding. And instead of receiving call here, we're going to receive column. So I found this post on the forum about so it's called documentation of what is passed to table cell rendered as view. This is something I wondered myself. And here we have Paul Griffith from Inductive Automation saying, well, giving us pretty much the definitive list of which properties are passed in by default. One of them is column, which is the column name, and that's what we were trying to pass in. So we don't actually need to pass that in. That's passed in for us. That's why we'll just change it to column to receive it. And then we're also going to add this table params. I already had it here, but we're going to add it. If you probably won't see it in yours, so all you have to do is just add a table. There we go. Okay, on the checkbox now, we have an event. We have an event here, and so the first things first is, since we renamed it from call to column, let's map that. And then we're also going to receive our table. Table will equal params table. And then we're going to, when we're sending the message inside the payload, we're also going to include the table. Just like this. And then I'll format this nicely because I have OCD, probably, I don't know. There we go. So on action performed, whenever we hit the checkbox, it's going to send a message to the appropriate cell in the appropriate table. The way it's going to know which table is, we're passing in a view or a parameter, a view parameter, and then we're going to use that table to differentiate between tables. Okay, let's go back to request. Okay, now when we hit, you can see when we hit enable here, all of our okay, we have an error, and let me see why. Index out of range. Okay, it's still doing something wrong. It might be on the table receiving side. Okay, let me find this real quick. So let's troubleshoot why we're getting this message. If we go here, you can see index out of range and on message received for flex params. So let's go here to this message. Let's go change cell here. We're not actually receiving the table. So we're sending from the message, but we're not receiving the table here. So this is all we need to do. And then check here if table is equal to, I believe we need to check here, params. There we go. So let me just go ahead and copy this. Actually this, like this. So now we're going to check which table it belongs to, because so we were trying to uncheck and check this third row, but params only had 2 rows, and that was where the problem was coming from. I think you guys all understand that. And then actually we need to configure scripts and change cell and add these to the other tables. So this we could have done. I could have just said pretty much add the same work that was already done on the table params to the other tables, but I wanted to show you because there was some tricky parts like differentiating between tables, so I think this might be helpful to some people. Also, I didn't realize how hard it is to film a project. Like this project would probably take me maybe 6 to 8 hours to finish from start to finish, but the fact that I'm filming it and just makes it that much more difficult. Okay, because I think of the things I want to do in the video beforehand, and then I have to remember what I want to do and remember how to do them, so it's a little tricky. But hopefully this is the last video in the series. Anyway, enough talking. Let's test our newest message. So when we hit body here, see that nothing happens. All of them are checked. So let me uncheck body. You'll see that nothing happens to these. So they're all independent of each other. here, and we go here. So they're all independent of each other. We can check them and make sure. I can change them all independently. So this is what we want. Okay, the next thing we're going to do, I know we're kind of jumping around, but we're going to format. So we're going to actually use, let me change this to title. Oops. Enter. Title. And here I'll do post, and then user. Just an example, I don't know. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to add a binding to this URL field that will actually use our params table here. If you look in Postman, and let's, for example, look at a GET request, it doesn't really matter. Whenever I add values here, you can see that my URL is actually being modified. This is actually pretty tricky to do because I could then go and type in google.com and I still, I have a fully interactive experience like URL builder here with parameters. I wanted to recreate this, but it's not a perfect recreation. You'll see why here. It's still kind of buggy, but I didn't want to spend too much time on it. But it works for the most part. So what we're going to do is on this text field for the URL, we're going to make a binding on the text property, and what we're going to pull in, we're going to transform it, but we're going to start with using flex params, tab container, flex params, table params, props, data. Quite a long ways to drill down, but there we go. So let me show you the problem, how I actually did it initially and how I found a bug. So if you look here in the preview, you see that all we're returning is this data set here. So we have 2 rows and 3 columns, actually 5 columns. So what we want to do is any row that's checked in this table here, so if it's checked, we want it to actually affect this URL here, just like you saw in Postman. So an easy way to do this, a naive way that I did it the first time I programmed such a system, I initialized the new table and then I just looped through. So let's go for item in value. Our value is coming from the previous transform here. Oops. And then we're going to check if the checkbox is actually checked. So my column is called checked. If that's true, we're going to ls.append. What are we going to append? Well, we're going to URL encode it. So here, actually, we're not going to URL encode it. This is another modification I want to make in the future. I'll show you what I mean here shortly. But we're going to say key or item key. Let me make this larger. So, and then we're going to go plus equals plus item value. So realize that item here is just an instance, so it's looping through each row. Items holds the first, second, the third row, the nth row. And then checked is a column name here. You can see checked is a column name. Key is a column name, and value is a column name for table params. And then what we're going to do is just return our delimiter for URL params dot join ls. And then you can see, so this works kind of how we want it to. So if you do this, it'll interact, or it'll be interactive here, dynamic. Except, say that you enter a URL and then you check this field, it's going to be replaced. So one way I thought of working around this is to actually pull in the value here. URL will equal the previous value. So let's go to props, props text. So we're going to pull in this, whatever's in this text field already. And then what I did was split it on the percent or the question mark character, and then take the 0th value here. But this will cause issues because say the self props text is empty, we're going to get an exception. So I'm going to wrap this in a try except. We'll say URL will equal an empty string if we throw an exception. And then what we want to do is just go URL plus. And do something like this. Okay, and then to start this off, let's clear this because it's remembering what was in there previously. And now I think we can add google.com, hopefully, and then remove here, and you can see that our URL here previously doesn't go anywhere. It's not a perfect solution. I don't like it myself because it's kind of inconsistent. I still found bugs with this approach, but it's the best one I found, and I think for our purposes it'll work. Okay, this video is going to be a lot longer than I expected, but we're going to finish off this project here. So the next thing we're going to do, since we have this is a pretty big step. We can see that we can modify our URL string. Okay, next thing we're going to do actually has to do with the design, and it'll make sense now why we put in flex params here, why we put each table inside a flex column. At this point it'll make sense because we're going to actually add a button. So there's no way to, from the session, there's no way to add rows to any of these tables, and we're going to fix that now. So let's go to flex params, deep select it, and add an icon actually. Let's add an icon here, and you'll see that it'll appear, and make sure it's nested within your flex columns. So it's right underneath the table, and then this icon I want to flex add. There we go. I think I'll set it to neutral 50, something like that. I want to make it a little bit smaller. And there's a few ways I can do this. I can set this to maybe 20. There we go. Or you can also do this, I believe, width 20 pixels. There we go. And then I want to do align self flex end. There we go. That actually worked. First try. There we go. And then, so what we could do actually is remove our width, delete, and let's actually add padding here. Or let's just put the width back in, sorry. There we go. The reason why I was thinking to remove it is because it's quite small here. Okay, let's add some more style properties. Let's add a cursor pointer. Let's actually make our width maybe 40. There we go. And let's do padding. So top and bottom we want 5 pixels, and then left and right we want 0. That way we have similar sized button, but we have more space around it to click on it. Let's okay, so now let's hover on it. There we go. It behaves more like a button. We can also add a style class. That way when you hover, it gets darker. So I don't think we added style classes before. So darken on hover is what we'll call it. So just go to perspective styles, right click on styles, create new style class. I'm just going to call mine darken on hover. So the base style is not going to change, but we're going to element state, go here to hover, and then we want to actually go text and then color. I want to color it maybe neutral 70. There we go. And then to our button here, we want to apply this style, or to our classes, and we'll apply darken on hover. There we go. So now let's see, when we hover and nothing happens. Interesting that this didn't pop up right away. So let's try to troubleshoot here. Maybe we need to save. Maybe we need to close request. Still no. Okay, let's go here. Set our base style. Maybe this is what needs to happen to new var neutral 70. It looks like my card is full on my camera, so for the rest of the video you're not going to see my beautiful face. Let me just turn my camera off. Okay. So let's have a base style of neutral 70 and see if that fixes it. If it doesn't, it's not a big deal. Okay. Now we have a button here to add a row. When we click on it, you can see, as you can see here, I'm kind of annoyed that my hover didn't work. But as you can see though, when we preview, there's a wacky border. We don't want that border. We want it to wrap the icon here so it looks like the icon is part of the table. That's what I would want. So how we're going to do that is actually go to the table. So right above the icon, go to the table and go down to style and add border and with the value of 0. So we're going to remove the table border and instead add it to its parent flex column. Now we're going to add it here, border 2px solid var 50, I believe, something like that. Let's see how this looks. Maybe it's 1 pixel here, 1px. So as you can see, now we have an embedded, you can say, well, I guess you can't see me putting quotes around embedded, but we have an embedded button in our table. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this same sort of principle. So let's copy this icon here, copy, and deep select and paste. And let's see if we go here, you can see the same thing. And then also flex body, deep select and paste. Oops. Let me paste here. There we go. And then also on the headers in the body table, we're going to remove the border off the table. Border 0, and instead add it to its parent flex column. So we're going to go border 1px solid var neutral 50. Enter, and then do the same thing for this table here. Remove the border. There we go. And then add it to its parent border. There we go. Now we can go through each of these and you can see that there's a button. Well, it's an icon. You can use a button as well. It doesn't really matter. And now on each of these icons, we can add an event here on click. Let's add a script. All we're going to do is just append a row to the appropriate table. So let's go props data dot append, and then we're just going to append an empty row. Well, actually, what we want to do here, so let me rephrase this. We're going to actually insert an empty row. So I think this will involve inserting each of the, so let's go checked. We can just leave it as empty. We're going to go key, also default to empty, value, default to empty, description, default to empty, and also delete. These are my column names. So let me copy this script here and then add the same thing to table headers here to this icon. There we go, script, paste, except I want, there we go, I want this to be the appropriate table. So let me go flex headers, props, or table headers, props, data. There we go. And then I want to do the same thing here on the last one. Hopefully you're getting the hang of this. Let me zoom in, paste, props data, make sure it's the right table. There we go, just like that. And now when we preview, we can add a column, and it's going to add, or add a row. And it's going to add a row for us with the button and the checkbox already in. Okay. And it looks like it's part of the table. That's the coolest part for me anyway. Okay, so now we have most of our UI done. I think the last thing I want to show for this series is to show a sample GET request. So let's actually modify. The last thing I want to do is add scripting here. So on the send button, this will be very unpolished scripting, by the way. This will just be just to give you an idea, because you're going to customize this project to your use case anyway, so you're likely going to change the send script, but I just want to give you an example of what I would do. And I'm going to finish this project and put it on the Ignition Exchange anyway, and then you can download it and look what I did to finish it up. But let's go ahead and configure events here. On action performed for this button, we're going to need to do a couple of things. First of all, we need to get the method here, HTTP method. We don't know, we're not always going to use get. We also have, if you remember, we have post, put, and delete as well. So first thing we're going to do here, I think we can, for the time being, let's enter this a few times and move it to the bottom. Okay, let me make this full screen. Okay, so what we have here is we have our URL, which is coming from this text field. Right now it's going to hold just this question mark. We also want to do the same thing for method. We want to get our drop down value. So let's go flex method, drop down, props, value. And this will be either get, post, put, or delete. And depending on this, so, and then we can have a conditional check here. So either using a case statement, or you can say if method is equal to post. So we're going to add in this scripting here. If method is equal to, well, actually, let's do this. So the reason I did this, I had an idea in my head. Get, so post, pass an elif method is equal to put, pass elif method is equal to delete. We're going to add in the scripting and then else. System.perspective.print invalid method, something like this. Okay, now we're going to fill in slowly. So I'll show you how to do get and post. There's a few ways to do this. You can use, if you look in the docs, you can use system.net. So let me go to the system.net documentation. So you can see for delete, get, post, and put, the methods we support, or we will support in our application, there are specific functions for them, or you can do the generic HTTP client And this will give you here client methods. It'll give you even more HTTP methods here, or wrappers. So you could go either way. If you want your Postman clone to support more HTTP methods, I would use this one. But if you just want to support the 2 we looked at, or the 4 we looked at, then you can use these predefined functions here. So systemnet HTTP get will work for us. Let me actually copy this. So we're going to implement in scripting here, and because this video is getting pretty long, we're going to implement here systemnet HTTP, or we're going to implement the get and the post method. So if we look in the docs once again, you can see that it returns a string. It's the content found at the given URL. So let's go back to our project, and we're going to say response is equal to systemnet HTTP get. We're going to pass in our URL. Let's look at what else we can. So we can pass in our URL. We can also pass in header values, and that's it. We don't pass in any post data. So header values here. This header values will actually come from the headers table. Hopefully this makes sense now. It'll come from here. So a header value can be like content type. I pressed tab accidentally. Then we can have application JSON. So this is a valid header value, and it's a pretty common one. So let's go back to our script actually and pull in headers will equal, let's go to our headers table. So let's go to flex params. Yeah, flex params, tab container, flex headers, table headers, props, data. And we don't actually want all of them, right? We don't want the entire table. We just want the ones that are checked. So we're going to do something similar. We're going to loop through here for item in headers. If we're going to check if headers or if item is checked, I'm going to add, we're going to append here to our custom list that we will now create. So headers ls, we'll initialize it to an empty list, and then here we will go hdls.append, and all we need to append is our key or item. It'll actually be an object, and then we can go item key will equal item value, just like that. And then so our header ls is going to contain only the ones that are active. So this one wouldn't be an hd_ls. There we go. We can actually go table headers, and then here we can go headers just to be more clear. Table, just like that. So headers, this list will be a list of objects. I'm not sure if that's what we want. I think it is. Actually, I think we want one object with key value pairs. Actually, I think we're going to end this video here because of how long it is. Okay, I'm going to figure this out. I think I can use a list comprehension for this. I don't need a list here of individual objects. I actually need just one object with key value pairs. So I'll figure this out for next time. Hopefully the last video to this series will be shorter, and it'll just be finishing up the scripting for get and post. I know I can do it. I think this video is already too long, so psych. will not be the last video. It'll be the penultimate video to this series. So thank you for watching. I know this is quite a long video, but hopefully you learned a few things like how not to use style classes and other stuff. But hopefully this is helpful. If you have questions, let me know in the comments for this video, or send me a message on Discord, or you can send me an email or anything else. Okay, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you very shortly in the next video.